Hey, what is up guys? It is your boy Speed here, and today we're going to be going over 6 of the top meta heroes and specifically covering what counters them, what heroes do well and would allow you to beat these heroes in the draft. Let's go over it so you guys can start winning your pubs. Alright, before we get into it, you know the deal, you know the spiel. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, comment down below, whatever you want to comment, anything, just comment anything. Name a hero, pick a hero. I'm going to pick my hero, Puck. Nice. If you haven't already, go check out the gameleap website, as I'll be making videos like this over there. I make one a day, videos like the YouTube videos, if not better. And so yeah, click the link down below, go sign up now, and I will help you to get to the MMR that you want. Alright, let's hop into it. Alright, so getting into it at number 1, we have Weaver. So Weaver has been a hero that has really come up out of, I'm not gonna lie, almost out of nowhere. It really seems like it's just become popular out of thin air. This hero went from unpicked to picked quite often at seemingly all levels. It's surfacing around a 50% win rate right now, a little bit over 50, so it's doing pretty well, and people seem to struggle with it. It's a very annoying hero. So here's 2 supports and 2 cores that counter it. The 2 supports that counter it in general are going to be your lockdown heroes. Weaver naturally thrives when there are no heroes that can keep him in place for a long period of time. In general, that's going to be the main theme of these heroes, except for one exception. But the first support is Shadow Shaman. Hex and Shackles are naturally very good options against Weaver, and on top of that, what I think is really nice about Shaman is he allows your team to stay as a unit, which is good against Weaver. What do I mean by this? This might seem a little bit weird, but when you're sieging a Shaman, what you can have your team do is have a very simple setup where you keep everyone behind the Shaman wards. Everyone stays nice and behind it. And then you plant down a sentry, and you basically ask the enemy team to run into you. You force them into you. And Weaver is not a tanky hero. However, he typically doesn't die very easily because he can kite around. But against Shaman and, you know, the structure that he can keep his team in, you can easily kill Weaver. Then we have Nyx Assassin. This one is very basic. Mana Burn counters Weaver, stuns counter Weaver, Spike Carapace is so easy to use against Sakuchi, and your ultimate is burst damage. Weaver is naturally a squishy hero that has high armor, but obviously not going to be too good against magical damage in the early game, and so Nyx is a very clear counter. Then in terms of cores, we have Bloodseeker, Rupture for obvious reasons. I think the Q giving Spell Amp is actually quite underrated on Bloodseeker's Blood Rage. You can give it to some of your spellcasters that might, you know, be the counters to Weaver, such as Alina or something like that, or a Leshrac. They can burst through them while you rupture them up and silence them, and yeah, it's a good option. And finally, this is probably the best one for pubs. CLINKZ in general does very well in pubs. The hero has a naturally high win rate, it's tanky, it gets pickoffs, it does a lot of damage. It's just a very easy hero to play, and yeah, it has a very high pub win rate, and it might not seem too good against Weaver. It's like, CLINKZ, you know, why is he good against Weaver? It's actually not, I don't think it's that obvious, at least. You know, the other heroes are obvious, they lock him down. But CLINKZ is kind of counters Weaver in some different ways. Number 1, Strafe makes you not able to be auto-attacked by ranged heroes. That's obviously a counter to Weaver, right? You can man up against Weaver in situations like when you have Strafe. Searing Arrows is a lot of damage, but that always applies. Skeleton Walk is actually a counter to Weaver. Invis in general is a counter to Weaver, because when he bugs you, there's nothing that really purges it. Yules doesn't purge it, Ghost Scepter doesn't purge it, Lotus doesn't purge it. However, Invis does. If there's no detection, you go Invis, you purge bug. There you go. Also, he has attack speed with Strafe to kill the bug if he happens to get dusted. And then finally, CLINKZ gets very tanky, so it's hard for Weaver to burst through him. And so yeah, for all those reasons, CLINKZ is a good option against Weaver. Next up on the list is the scariest offlane hero with the second best spell in Dota, that would be Gush, is Tidehunter. Tidehunter seems to be dominating pubs, just such a reliable pick. Even a lot of people are picking him as a position 5 or a position 4 because of how good Gush and Ravage simply are. It's not really a crazy formula, they're just good spells. But here's a couple counters. In the carrier role, we have Juggernaut. In the laning stage, Spin does a lot of damage to Tide. Very obviously good against Tide. Tide is good against what? Physical damage. Counters physical. Jug does a lot of magical. There you go. Bada bing, bada boom. Also, Jug in general needs stick charges to function in a lot of lanes. The hero has a lot of mana problems, and Tide is going to naturally cast a lot of spells just to lane. And so a stick pickup on Jug is fantastic. It's going to give you constant spins, constant healing words, which allows you to out-sustain Tidehunter, who can actually have sustain issues. This hero in general especially if someone rushes something like, you know, Mana Boots, or, which is so common, or Soul Ring. They will have a lot of sustain issues, and Jug will naturally outlast the Tidehunter and, you know, kill him eventually. And finally for Juggernaut, Omni Slash, the fact that you cannot get hit by Anchor Smash, and you can avoid Anchor Smash because of the natural cast range of Swift Slash and Omni Slash, is actually just good against Tide. You cannot purge Omni Slash, which is a great option because you can obviously not get Ravaged when you go on it, which is a big deal. Then we have Ancient Apparition. It's magical damage. Tide's tanky. Tide largely, you know, survives by purging things, but, you know, you can purge Cold Feet, but you can't purge Ice Vortex, which is the spell that AA puts on the ground to amp damage. You can't purge it, so it's going to constantly slow you. That's great. AA Blast cannot be purged, so it's going to shatter the Tide and constantly prevent his regen. Tide buys a lot of regen items, and so yeah, you just are good against Tide. Magic damage is also good against Tide. There we go. Next up, we have Enigma. Honestly, I think this one should be pretty clear. Midnight Pulse and Black Hole can't be purged. It really is a big deal. I don't think people understand how big of a deal this is. Other heroes that naturally counter Tide tend to be like Silver Edge heroes or Break heroes. For instance, Nyx was actually really good against Tide for a while, just because Vendetta was a break, but they removed that, so that matchup's kind of meh now. Still alright, but it's just meh. And yeah, Enigma just doesn't really care about Kraken Shell in the late game, so being able to lock down a Tide, you know, to straight up Midnight Pulse Black Hole him with a +1 is very powerful against Kraken Shell. And finally, we have Grimstroke. This is a, I don't know, I'm not going to call it an OG counter, because Grimstroke is not an OG hero, but, you know, the W can't be purged. I know I'm saying, like, a lot of the same thing. It's like, oh, really, Speed? But the W cannot be purged, and so if you W him, he has to hit it 3 times to kill it, to purge the silence. Tide doesn't have attack speed. That hero never buys attack speed. It just never does. Maybe AC, one in every, like, 1,000 games, you know? But that's it, and so he has a hard time purging the bug. The leash is great as well, cannot be purged, right? So you can link Tidehunter to other heroes, makes it very hard for him to kite around. Ink swells a lot of magical damage in the lane, and so is your Q. So every single spell you have is essentially good against Tide. Now we have Wraith King! Even though this hero recently got nerfed, and I don't know, I haven't seen as much of it, it definitely is still popular, and it's definitely still dominating pubs at a 54% win rate. It's still a hero that farms really fast and has 2 lives with a very straightforward laning stage that tends to be pretty good. So how do you deal with it? Well, as much as I hate putting this hero on any list of counters, I'll say it. Underlord. Everything about Underlord is good against Wraith King. You have a way to deal with skeletons. You out CS him in lane, right? You have so much damage that you can even deny when Wraith King has his crit up, which is pretty cool. You buy items that counter Wraith King, right? Just keep in mind, Wraith King buys Radiance most games. What do you buy? Mech, Pipe, Greaves, right? All really good items against Wraith King. And finally, your W just kites the heck out of Wraith King. This hero is really slow. He doesn't have mobility like a PA or a Jug or a Slark. He's gonna get stuck in the root. So will his skeletons. Also, he will get stuck in the Q, which is really good against a high HP hero like Wraith King, considering the Q does max HP as damage, right? It really shreds these high HP heroes. Then we have Alchemist. Alchemist is good kind of for a lot of the same reasons Underlord is. Wraith King can't really get out of Acid Spray, and Wraith King has really bad armor. In general, Wraith King just struggles with armor, so against Alch, you really need like Armlet AC, otherwise you will just get shredded to the Acid Spray. So it's hard to get out of that. The stun is good. It's really easy to land the stun. Wraith King just cannot really avoid it. And then you just out-farm him. You hit an earlier timing, and you out-sustain him. The Radiance is really not a problem for you. And so just, you kind of out-sustain him. That's like a big thing for Wraith King. Any hero that can kind of man up throughout both of the lives is good against Wraith King. And so you're going to notice the trend between a lot of these heroes. They all are good at that. The next one is Undying. Same thing. Tombstone, Wraith King has not the best attack speed. He buys some attack speed items like Armlet, maybe a Midas, AC, you know, but it's not great. It's definitely not great. And as I said, this hero naturally gets kited. And so you put the Tombstone on the back, the Wraith King's gonna get isolated, skeletoned up, get stuck. You know, that's good. Then you have Heal, Decay, all great sustained abilities against the Wraith King. And finally, your ultimate, it just prevents you from getting bursted as a support. And you can really just make this Wraith King not be able to move. It's super valuable. And finally, the last support is Phoenix. Yeah, this is one that doesn't necessarily have a high win rate, but I think it's largely because people are pretty bad at Phoenix. It's a hard hero to play, but if you're really good at landing the fire spears in lane, you can pressure the Wraith King really hard in lane, right? He just cannot man up. You can deal with his skeletons to an extent, which is great. Sunray against a high HP hero, right? Sunray does max HP as damage, and the longer the Sunray goes on someone, the more damage it does. So a lot of people don't know that. Like, the back half of the Sunray will always do more damage. And so, against Wraith King, it's very easy to land. As I've said multiple times, the hero cannot move, and so it really does not like these heroes that kind of just shred you when you stand still. And so Phoenix is really like that, and then yeah, you just don't kill Egg very well. Next up on the list is Juggernaut. This hero has a very surprising 54% win rate right now. It is incredibly high as a carry, but let's go over some of the counters to one of the most reliable carries in the game. There's not a lot of heroes that Jug has a bad win rate against. It just seemingly does always well, which is kind of the story of Jug. It's just a very solid hero. And its Ags and Ag Shard make it very versatile and good in almost every single game. They also make him scale so much better than he did. But yeah, here's a couple counters. Number one, Ursa. I feel like everything is just bad here. You can't really spin on Ursa because he'll just overpower and kill you through it. You can't really spin away because he's going to buy Basher, so he counters you there. It makes it also hard to split push because a core can solo pick you off. Omni Slash is not that good against Ursa because of Enrage. So as you can see, unless you can kite out Ursa's BKB and Rage, Jug just isn't good. Next up is Night Stalker. This is one I don't think I would have put on the list if I just was like listing my top heroes, but after looking at the win rates and thinking it through, I think this is a good option. Night Stalker, which is the hero that EE tried to counter me with in DPC Division 2, was not good enough against my Juggernaut. But the reason why it's good is you silence him. You know, Jug's defensive item tends to be Sanch Yasha or Manta. The Crippling Fear ignores both of those items. Stats Resistance does nothing against Crippling Fear, which is Night Stalker's AoE silence. Neither does Manta, which is a big deal. Cannot spin out of it. You cannot Swift Slash or Omni Slash. And when Jug can't do any of that, he's a pretty useless hero. Most heroes can't really lock down Jug for that long, and if they do, it often puts them in a weird spot, but Night Stalker has no problem just going in and getting on top of the Jug. It's not too much of a problem for him. So I can absolutely see, and I felt in the game I had to play against the Night Stalker pretty bad. He picked me off twice in a row where I could not cast a single spell because of slightly bad positioning and because of the counter matchup. Next up on the list is Lion. It's cause he locks you down. Next up on the list is Spirit Breaker. It's because he can cancel spin TP. Next up on the list is Enigma. This hero in the offlane with Necromonicon 3 is dirty. Man, it is so hard to play into. It can solo kill almost anyone, and it creates a real threat where you really have to fear it in the early game because of this Necro build. And in the late game, you know that double black hole is going to come at some point, and it's really hard to scale against. So I just feel like Enigma is an overall all-around threat. It's just so versatile right now. And so here's a couple counters. Number one is RUBIK. Just kidding, that hero is so overrated against Enigma, I swear. This is like always the common counter pick. It's not that good. Yes, you can steal Black Hole. You can steal Malefice and Midnight Pulse, and they're all fine spells. It's just like, I don't know, it's kind of slow. Like, most of the time, it's kind of hard to steal and then cast Black Hole. And yeah, it's glorious when it happens. It, like, looks really cool. But it's just, yeah, kind of slow. Like, you compare it to Clockwork, which is one of my counters. Clockwork can very easily cancel Black Hole regardless of Enigma's items. Even if Enigma has a Linken's, BKB, and an Aeon Disc, which is practically every defensive item, I guess Yules and Glimmer, it doesn't matter the item. Clock can always cancel Black Hole as long as there's nothing in the way. Sure, I guess Necros could get in the way. But the point is, RUBIK, if Enigma has a Linken's and a BKB, which is pretty common to buy against RUBIK, cannot cancel it. And so eventually, RUBIK just falls off in that matchup. And I don't know, it's just like kind of hard to steal and cast Black Hole and stay in position. I've just always felt like this is the case, and people might disagree with me on that, and that's like a hot take, but I think it's so overrated. On top of that, Enigma has a 53% win rate against RUBIK, so there's that. And then we have Rakor, we have Arc Warden. Just stays in the back. I feel like having an illusion that can go in and pressure Enigma is great. A big problem for a lot of cores in the late game is that if they run in and it's late game, you just die to Black Hole late game. Like, it's very hard to not die because there's no item you can buy to counter it besides like sort of Aeon Disc, but like, meh, you know, it's like, eh. So Warden is a great option there because he can go like Hex and, you know, a Daedalus and even like Swift Blink. And in the late game, you can just kind of blink onto this Enigma, chop him down, maybe force out a bad BKB, force out some like bad Black Hole or Midnight Pulse Malefice to protect himself. And I just think it's a great option in the late game to prevent you from having to send your real hero in that's just going to get solo Black Hole because you're the position 1. Then we have Medusa, kind of for similar reasons as Warden. He sort of doesn't die in Black Hole. I will say that Malefice is quite annoying for Medusa, you know, so is Midnight Pulse, but Stone Gaze is so good against Black Hole. When you initiate the fight, it's practically impossible for Enigma to go in. It buys a lot of time for your team to clean up other heroes without having to fear the Black Hole, because Stone Gaze will practically always cancel Black Hole if Enigma tries to initiate and Black Hole the Medusa, because you have to face the person you're Black Holing unless you're doing some crazy no-look Black Hole stuff. Alright, and the last one, as much as I don't like putting this hero, it's like Underlord and Wraith King and CLINKZ. They're just like the high pub winner heroes right now. Like, they kind of always are for some reason. Well, I've talked about the reasons, but yeah, just, you know, 2 lives. Midnight Pulse is kind of annoying. So is Malefice. Like, we went over that, but like, you're good against units, sort of, because of Radiance. The laning stage is fine. Yeah, that's... And last, but certainly not least, is Razor. It's like, Razor, what? That hero's meta? It's like sort of meta. It's semi-meta. I think it's going to pick up a little bit of traction as time goes on, as people begin to experiment more and more. But I think players are struggling against it because the win rate's quite high. It's about 53%. And it's one of those heroes that seemingly doesn't have very clear counters. It's like a very, I don't know, Razor's weird, very weird hero. And so its counters aren't that obvious. And so let's go over a few. The standard in the mid lane, if it's mid lane Razor, I'm more so talking about side lane Razor, which I think will become more common. But let's talk about mid lane just for one example. Quap is the most standard. So just putting that on the table. Quap is like the counter typically. Why? Because you do a lot of magical damage and you can kite out the link. A very easy reason there. But in other lanes, Enigma is very good against Razor. Razor, unlike the other heroes we mentioned, does not have 2 lives. And for you to static link someone, you have to be melee range. And generally, Razor doesn't like units. So Enigma has units, and Enigma likes heroes that have to walk in and go alone and are hyper carry heroes, like heroes that really go frontline and sicko mode, because he'll just Black Hole them and just say, you're dead, right? And just remove them from the fight. And, you know, Razor really can struggle against that, so that's a good matchup just for that. Then we have Weaver. Razor simply cannot really link Weaver. Weaver's bug is quite a problem for Razor. Razor doesn't have the best attack speed in a lot of games. It's all right. Depends on the build you go. You know, there's kind of like a variety of builds. Sometimes you go Yule, sometimes you go like Drum, sometimes Sanjin Yasha. So there's some variations there. Some better than others against Weaver. You know, generally like the more attack speed, the better. But yeah, just the ability to kite around the Razor is very powerful. You're going to kite him out and you can go Scotty in the late game, which is really great against ranged auto attackers because the effects double. And so, yeah, Weaver has all of that going for him. Then for supports, we have Willow. Willow cannot really, I'm pretty sure, you guys can correct me on this on the comments. Sometimes I blank out on things, but I'm pretty sure if Dark Willow is in Shadow Realm, she cannot be hit while linked by the Razor. So assuming that's true, that matchup's just good for that reason. You can protect yourself. A lot of supports obviously cannot protect themselves nearly as well. Then you have so many disables, and very often Razor will buy Yules as a defensive item. We are seeing a lot of BKB rush, which is good against Willow. So, you know, you could argue if you're playing Razor and you're against Willow, gotta get that BKB as soon as possible. But if you go the Yules and he uses himself, it's very easy to bramble on the way down. Even if he purges your Cursed Crown, you can, as I said, bramble on the way down. Get followed up with a lot of magical damage, which tends to be very good against Razor. Razor obviously thrives against physical as he links damage. He's very fast, so it's hard to stay on top of him unless you are a burst hero like Sven. And finally is MIRANA. You leap away from the link, you do a bunch of magical damage, and you make people go invis. And the invis isn't actually the best because I think the link stays on top. You can tell if it breaks or not. So like Razor has that going in that matchup. There you go. But to be fair, Mirana's ultimate does give movement speed. I think a lot of people forget that it's not just invisibility, it's also movement speed, which is very nice against Razor considering he's an absolute race car. He's Lightning McQueen, so if you can run away from him, maybe you can win the series and be the star of the movie Cars. Alright, I'll see you guys in the next one. If there's any heroes you're curious about being countered or anything you just want to go over in the comment section down below, I'm happy to see what you guys have to say, and I'll see you in the next one. And that's all, but remember, before you leave, come on, before you tune out, subscribe to the GameLeap website where we are going to help you get to the next rank. If you're stuck, click the link down below, and I'm out. Peace.